Greetings, I'm Yvonne Stapp for Science for the Public, and I welcome you to our Contemporary Science Issues and Innovations program. One of the major concerns today is the need for clean energy, and one of the most promising energy innovations is called the Bionic Leaf. This device was developed by Daniel Nocera, the Patterson-Rockwood Professor of Energy at Harvard University. The artificial leaf was designated a breakthrough technology in 2017, and for two good reasons. First, the device can produce clean and cheap energy, hydrogen for energy and fuel, and second, the energy can be distributed without a grid. It's ultimately free energy for everyone. Dr. Nocera is going to give us the background and the status of the Bionic Leaf. Dr. Nocera, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, it's nice to be here and talk about the sun and renewable energy.
Right. And on that subject, could you tell us a little bit about the basic concept of this thing based on the way photosynthesis works, just how that works?
Sure. We probably remember from even grade school maybe that what photosynthesis is to take water and sunlight and then carbon dioxide from the air, and then it makes biomass, food, sugars, and oxygen, the oxygen we breathe. But when you start breaking it down, you find that photosynthesis is a two-step process or a two-step dance. And what happens is, we all know, you give a plant water, and when you give the plant water, what the plant does is it sucks the water up into its leaves, and then it uses sunlight only to split water to hydrogen and oxygen. So if you remember your schooling, water is H2O. And so what the leaf does is it rearranges the bonds of water to make a high-valued fuel, oxygen and hydrogen. So that's step one. Then in the dark, it takes the hydrogen, and nature stores it in a special way called NADPH. It's a small technical matter, but it's a solid form of hydrogen. And it breathes in carbon dioxide, and then it makes biomass, or fuels and sugar. So you can think about photosynthesis as the light reaction, splitting water to hydrogen and oxygen, and then the dark reaction, combining that hydrogen that was solar produced with carbon dioxide to make things like biomass, foods, and sugars. And so that's what we wanted to do, is emulate photosynthesis.
Right, and it was a brilliant idea, and it looks like it should be so simple, and they tell us that water contains enormous amounts of energy, very small amounts of water, so you were on top of this, and so you developed a device that called, at various times, the Bionic Leaf, the artificial leaf, I guess, first, and so on, but whatever. What is that concept? I mean, how does that work?
Sure, yeah. So the artificial leaf, I just told you there's the light reaction to split water to hydrogen and oxygen using sunlight. And that's what we did with the artificial leaf. And then the bionic leaf is the dark reaction to take that hydrogen and carbon dioxide to make biomass or fuels. So let me tell you the first part, the artificial leaf. What we did is, if you think of a solar panel that's on your roof, sunlight hits it, and what it does is it separates charge. It makes an electron and a positive charge. And electrons flowing in wire is current. That's what you get when you put the plug in the wall. So what happens with the solar panel is sunlight hits the silicon, you separate the charge, and it wants to recombine, but the solar panel doesn't let it recombine, and it sends it to an outside circuit where the electron can travel around and reconnect with the positive charge it was created from. And what you do is you put a load on it. Your house, light bulbs light up. The problem is when the sun goes down, no solar electricity. So what we did is we said, we'll take the heart of the solar panel, just the silicon, and we'll separate charge, and then we'll invent two catalysts, two materials that we can coat the silicon with, and they get charged up. So when the sun's hitting the silicon, it's making the electrons and the positive charges, and it charges up those catalysts, and it charges them up to such a degree that they can then split water to make hydrogen and oxygen. So that's what the artificial leaf does. And it makes literally H2 plus O2. You can take the artificial leaf, and it's a piece of silicon with the coating, drop it in water, hold it up to sunlight, and you'll see bubbles of hydrogen coming off one side and oxygen coming off the other, just like what happens in the leaf.
Right. And this is a small device, too, card size, right?
So depending on how much you want,
yes.
You know, if for a house, you would, if you think about a house, you could have the solar panels that are running your house also generating the hydrogen and the oxygen.
Right. So this was called the artificial leaf and bionic leaf.
Now, where does this funny word bionic leaf come in? Well, it has the word bio in it, bionic, so there's biology. So what we said, you could use hydrogen right now in your house in what's called a fuel cell. That's what a fuel cell does. It takes hydrogen and oxygen, which you produce from the sun, and then a fuel cell combines them and you get electricity. And so that would be sufficient. The problem is twofold. One is we don't know how to store hydrogen very well. So that's number one. And then number two, you need fuel cells. One fuel you do use in place of hydrogen is liquid fuels. That's what you put in your car, gasoline. So what we said is we'll go one step further and go the complete distance of photosynthesis. So we took a bacteria, and we used what's called genetics, synthetic biology, and we really goofed up this bacteria. We said you can only eat hydrogen. And so this poor bacteria, it will die if it doesn't have hydrogen. But if it's eating hydrogen, it's like it's eating food. And remember, that hydrogen came from solar water splitting. And then we tell it, eat the hydrogen, and then breathe in carbon dioxide from the air and combine them and make a liquid fuel. So that's what the bionic leaf does. It takes the hydrogen from the artificial leaf, breathes in carbon dioxide, and then it makes the fuel. And that happens in the dark. You don't need the sun in. Because I put all the energy of the sun in hydrogen and oxygen. So once the energy's there, the bug is using the hydrogen as an energy source like we do when we eat food. You're using that as an energy source. So it's using the hydrogen as an energy source and then combining it with carbon dioxide to make a liquid fuel.
So now we've got the bionic leaf, and that answers some of there have been these sort of innovations over the past decade or so that keep improving on this, I guess, so much. Would you tell us about the advantages of this system that's been written up a great deal? You've made many appearances and so on, but there was a lot of excitement about this. The advantages, please.
So first off, you have a distributed energy supply. So that's the first thing. We all rely on the grid. If somebody takes out the grid, you're at home, you're in big trouble. So first off, you aren't relying on a centralized infrastructure. It's totally distributed. That's number one. Number two, it's using only natural things that are around everybody. Air is around everybody. Anybody can look up and see the sun. And there's any water source. One important discovery we had to make is that it didn't have to be pure water. It could be any water, seawater, a puddle on the ground, the Charles River here in Boston, even urine works out of urine. So it uses all natural resources. And the reason we like distributed and natural resources is it's not dependent on status in society. You could be very poor or very wealthy and have the same access to energy.
which is one of the great things. I guess that was what attracted a great deal of attention. And the other thing that you have pointed out numerous times is that it is everywhere in the world, whether you are rural, whether you are in a very small island nation, wherever you are, you can have this free energy.
Yes. And so that's important. And then the other big advance was that you can, because the way it's working, we took out the inefficiency of the front end of photosynthesis. So this is pretty remarkable. But doing this artificial photosynthesis, we're 10 to 100 times more efficient than nature. So
Yes.
artificially, we outdid the leaf by quite a bit. And that's important when you're building an energy economy, is to use energy efficiently.
Yes, to be able to extract that. That is something that is, I'm sure, very important. I'm not sure if folks are aware of it, but that photosynthesis is relatively inefficient in terms of extracting that energy. But you've improved on that a number of times now. So this has no waste, no pollutants, can use ordinary water. It can be used everywhere. It's off the grid. It's universal. And the chip, I guess, I wouldn't say chip, the device itself is made of cheap materials still, right? And
that's
everything.
Right. So silicon.
Yes.
That is what it's used for auto solar panels. And then we use very inexpensive metals, things like nickel and tin. So very inexpensive metals to do this. And so that's important down the road if you want to begin implementing.
Yes, that's what I understand. Now, there was some problem, you alluded to this just a little bit ago, of the difficulty of storing. The hydrogen presents a number of problems. It has over and over again. It would be so great if we could use it, and it hasn't worked out well. Could you give us a little understanding of that?
Sure. So say you have by the way, I've been in almost every hydrogen fuel cell car, and you should know, and your viewers should know, and the listeners, all the auto companies have hydrogen fuel cell cars. They've invented them already. They exist, they know. They could roll them out tomorrow if they wanted to. But there's a problem.
Yes.
Where will you get your hydrogen from? There's no gas station to get hydrogen. And hydrogen is a type of gas that it's difficult to just put in the same pipelines you use for natural gas.
Yes.
So there's two big problems with hydrogen. It's storing it, and the way we store it in the car is in compressed tanks, high compression tanks, and then also moving it. And so that's what stopped it. I would tell you, if you had a fuel cell car versus a battery car, you would take the fuel cell car in a minute. You don't have you have much longer extension. You can drive much further. If it gets cold and you're going up a mountain and you're in Colorado, the batteries don't stop working. Sometimes you'll see battery cars abandoned on the side of the road. It gets too cold for the batteries.
Oh, yes.
So they're really great, but the problem is the storage and distribution problem. So that's why we went the extra step with the Bionic Leaf, to take hydrogen and combine it with carbon dioxide and make liquid fuels, because that we already do.
Okay, so go ahead, sorry.
Always the short story of hydrogen is storing and distributing. So.
Yes, and it takes a lot of compression. Is that correct? There are a lot of peculiarities, and I believe that you have mentioned that in terms of the distribution in pipes, it has an effect on pipes. It just presents a long list of difficulties. Has this in your mind? Is that going to be resolved?
we still need a magic material for storage. So science hasn't figured that out yet.
You will.
But this distribution and the movement, there are U.S. companies there are U.S. companies like Plug Power, for instance, and they are developing fueling stations. And so I believe that part will get worked out, and I believe distribution will. But the one science discovery that's needed is a way to store hydrogen in a very dense way without compression. And that's still missing.
Are you working on that?
No, I have a lot of friends who are, and you can imagine a lot of people are, because it could be very lucrative down the line if you're the person who comes up with that.
Yes.
But matter of fact, I avoided it by inventing the Bionic Leaf. So I kind of did a short
You did your bit.
I knew it was such a hard problem. There's no way I could figure it was easier for me to genetically fool bugs to eat hydrogen and breathe in carbon dioxide.
I understand, but you did your part there on this. But that is a massive problem. It would solve so many difficulties if we could use hydrogen, but over and over again, despite the hype, we keep bumping into this difficulty of how you're going to store it and the numerous difficulties with it. So and the other one is the scalable problem of developing this so that it is scalable. Now, I think I understand that the device itself can power a household, and for a number of days, a very limited amount of water, just a couple of bottles or so of water. But on a larger scale, what's happening there?
So this is sort of the sad news of today, is we have spent in, say, the US, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars for your infrastructure. And so it's always going to be way cheaper to put a straw in the ground and suck oil out, or burp gas out of the earth, because as a country, we have this massive infrastructure that's already paid off. And so then we get to this issue of carbon credits or carbon taxes or whatever you want to call it, to try to level a playing field of this large paid off infrastructure. Now, in the poor parts of the world, that hasn't been built yet. So that's why a lot of my attention is into the poor parts of the world, because I don't have to deal with this established. It's a question for the poor parts of the world. Do they do what we've done, or do they take a different path? And so I've given them an option for a different path. One other thing we did that went one step further than the artificial leaf is you can also, there's nitrogen in the air. And if you take nitrogen and hydrogen, you can make ammonia and fertilizer and grow crops. And that we have done. That's called, so the fuel one we call Bionic Leaf C for carbon. And for fertilizer, we call it Bionic Leaf N for nitrogen.
I see.
And there's a company that started in Massachusetts, not far from your studios in Harvard here. And they are now making a sustainable fertilizer this way. And that we've needed no incentives for, and it's going to market already.
Oh, my goodness.
That I'm really happy about.
Yes.
And to tell you how that impacts the carbon problem, for instance, we just did a field trial on a 400-acre farm. And when you make fertilizer, you make lots of CO2. And it turns out the way this works, the Bionic Leaf N, on one 400-acre farm, we saved 153 metric tons of carbon dioxide from going into the air.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
Isn't that nice? And that we've needed no incentives for. So for the Bionic Leaf N, making what I would call sustainable agriculture, which has a huge CO2 footprint if you don't do it sustainably, that is moving forward quickly. But the fuel one, we need incentives because of this very large infrastructure in the US we paid off. In the poorer parts of the world, I'm hopeful that I won't need those as big an incentive and I could move forward there. And that's one thing we're trying right now.
Well, two things. First of all, I want to go back to the fertilizer thing momentarily. The other is in terms of this, what you're calling an infrastructure problem, it is also vested interests who do not want to move in this renewable energy kind of direction. But now we're at a point in crisis all over the world, so that people are being sort of forced back to coal or gas, or oil, and we need to get past it. So stay in there, because it's a matter of time. We have to make a shift, and you'll be there with that. The other is that the use of the soil. What I understood about this was one of the fabulous pieces of this is that it's very direct. It goes directly where you need it in the soil. Could you please just give us a little description?
Sure. Yeah, you're getting to another problem, which is runoff, because
Yes.
the way we do agriculture, we put so much ammonia or
That's
fertilizer.
right.
The plants can only get a little. The fertilizer is a salt. It's like sodium chloride. It's ammonium chloride, so it's like salt. So if you dissolve salt in water, it goes everywhere.
Yes.
The water's in there. So that's what happens with fertilizer. And then you get these things called algal blooms, which are environmentally very dangerous too. And so the beautiful thing of this bug, it's a bug, bacteria. It goes down and attaches to the root of the plant, and it does direct injection into the plant. So you don't have it everywhere in the soil, and it only is fertilizing on demand the plant's need for fertilizer. So that's a really nice aspect of it.
Besides
the CO2, it's environmentally the right thing to do by avoiding runoff.
Right. How is that applied? Do you just put the device out in a field, or how do you do it?
This is how we do it. We use a solar panel, and I still have to split water to hydrogen and oxygen. Right. And then the hydrogen can be combined with CO2 to make, so one thing, a nutrient for the plant, and the plant could eat that. So for instance, I could make green methanol and the bug could eat it, or the bug could eat the hydrogen directly. And what it does, you can think about it like a hibernating bear. It gets fat on CO2 and hydrogen with the solar panel. Once it has all that energy inside it, it doesn't need the sun anymore. I can put it in the ground. And so what we do is it's like a fermenter being powered by a solar panel or by a green source of hydrogen. And then the bugs grow. And then they're concentrated. You just put them in the water supply, and then when the farmer sprays the water in the field, the bugs are in it, and they just go down in the soil and attach to the root of the plant.
And they know where to go.
We use drip irrigation.
Yes.
It's really nice. It's called fertigation. So for the farmer, they apply it like they would apply anything.
Yes.
And they don't need any special application.
Right, and that's particularly interesting. Those little bugs know exactly where to go. That bacteria knows where to go. And the other really neat thing there is that it provides what is needed, not the excess that, as you have pointed out, that has been a real environmental contamination is, if people are aware of it, of the nitrogen fertilizer runoff is terrible, yes. So this is fabulous so far.
And you know where it's going to be used first, as usual, it's always California that's a little bit ahead of it. So in the next few years, California, because of the runoff problem and CO2 problem, they're going to be demanding a 50% reduction in chemical fertilizer.
Excellent.
And so all these companies, like all the companies, when you go into the stores and get your produce, a lot of the California companies are going to be under pressure for new fertilization techniques. And The Bionic Leaf N, the one that does nitrogen, ammonia, this is a great alternative for them. And a lot of the big growers in California have recognized that. I've been very appreciative. They've been very kind to me to do big field trials.
Well, you're probably a hero for them. So, take the credit by all means. You've been at this, for quite a while. So you have, at the present moment, you've done a lot of sort of, what would you call it, sub-innovations as you've gone along over the decade. There's still a great deal of excitement about this. So the one thing is the development of fuel that can be used by cars and so on.
Right.
And that's the big headache still. Is that it?
That's the headache there's nobody who's going to invent a substitute for oil, gas, and coal without an incentive because of what I told you. So when people say it's not cheap enough, I don't like hearing that.
Right.
By the way, what I'm doing is way cheaper than what was being done at the turn of the 1900s when there was no infrastructure available. Right. Those were the oil barons. And so that's when we decided to move to oil. And we had to build this massive infrastructure, which we've done over 100 years.
Yes.
It's a huge investment. Well, guess what? If this existed back in the 1900s, there's no way we would have taken this path because that's way more expensive than what I'm proposing. However, the reality is that infrastructure now is this, and it's paid off. And so when people say it's not cheap enough, it is cheap. It's just not cheap enough compared to a multi-trillion-dollar investment that's already paid off. And that's why you need these carbon policies or incentives that help move new technologies forward.
Well, and the other is the crisis that we are in energy around the world, and we have to really consider that at this point, that you have to change to clean energy. We don't have options about that really anymore. But how soon do you think that you can make this viable, scalable for energy?
Yeah, so there's a few answers to that. One is for the fertilizer, which is saving huge amounts of carbon from going into the air, that's happening now. And it's here and now. I don't need any incentives. We have lots of customers in the future. And so that's been great. For the fuel part, one thing I didn't tell you is while we were working on the hydrogen piece, we figured out how actually not to make hydrogen. This is going to sound counterintuitive. And the reason is we made two compounds that you could dissolve in water and then charge them up with solar electricity, but not make hydrogen and oxygen. Now, why would you do that? Because at night, you can then charge up the compounds and at night flow the water over itself and then recollect the charge. So it's a battery. It's called a flow battery. So while I knew I couldn't beat the hydrogen problem, so what we did is use all of our knowledge. It's called proton-coupled electron transfer. It's a field of science I invented, the basic science behind the discovery. Our knowledge of this basic science allowed us to make this flow battery. And so this is something I'm very happy about. One of the largest defense contractors in the world, Lockheed Martin, they bought the company to make the hydrogen company. But this is not to make hydrogen and make the flow battery. It's called sun catalytic. So they're now making a massive flow battery for power companies. Now, why is that interesting? This is where you take advantage of the existing infrastructure. You have a solar panel on your house. You produce electricity. It goes over the wire to the sun catalytic's flow battery, which, by the way, when I sold it, it was the size of a few doors on the wall. The one that Lockheed Martin now is making is huge. So it's really, it's called, you can look it up on the web.
Yeah, I will.
But they can then store the electricity and then at night when you need it, ship it back over the grid to you. So we did have even a win there, and that's already being commercialized. They are making a 10 megawatt flow battery and going to 100 megawatt in the future. The power companies will store your solar electricity over the grid and send it back to you.
Right.
So that's also worked. But the fuel one, the
Yes.
one you're talking, like, can I put it in a gas tank? That I'm going to need carbon incentives for.
Yes, I understand that, but it's a question of time. It is doable. Is that what you?
Doable? Yeah. The beauty of science, you may not realize, but over the last 20 years, while people were sleeping, scientists kept churning away, and they've now shown everything is doable. It's a question of how much does the public want it? And it gets to your question, how worried are they with climate change to actually begin adopting
Yes,
it?
and for that you need governments to help fund this and governments to be aware of it, policymakers to be aware of it. You might get much more sympathy from the public than the agencies and things, but it's a question of time. I just wanted to make sure it is doable, it is scalable, it can be done if there is a commitment.
It's doable, and science is proving it's doable.
Okay.
It's a question of now price and what we're willing to pay for it.
Excellent. I know that this is going to take off. I can't wait. I've been, reading on this for quite a while now. It is very interesting. So please keep it up. I'm glad you appeared for us before you do get the Nobel for this. Dr. Nocera, thank you so much for your wonderful information today.
Well, thank you for having me, and it was a delight to talk to all your listeners.
Thank you.